drag on and on and on. So unfortunately, I've been character developed by advocates over the last couple of years. Seriously character developed. So luckily for me, he's let me represent him. He's given me his power of attorney, and the civil procedure rules allow you to act in person. That's why you can go represent yourself in person or act on somebody's behalf who is not able to. So yes, I think for me that's...
So you are an experienced litigant.
Trying.
Good.
Trying, yes.
Good. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's about it. And I'm an entrepreneur as well, and a tribal activist.
What
is a tribal activist?
I created this hashtag in 2017 called I Am Kenyan, and it has all the tribes of Kenya in it, and the hashtag Mimi ni Kenya. So I realized that because I grew up obviously not in Kenya, and I realized that a lot of divisive tactics we had to separate us was divide and conquer. And I'm obsessed with tribes. They're so beautiful. The culture, the heritage, the language, the customs. And when I realized that, because I actually remember trying to get endorsed by government agencies, even National Cohesion didn't even sponsor us in 2017. And we just realized that this conversation was not for them to change. It was for us to change, because they were profiting off tribalism, the same way they were profiting off Hustler versus Dynasty. And it's just something that will never end unless we decide as citizens how we want to be led.
Petitioning at the court obviously is a right of every Kenyan citizen.
Yes.
To go to court to say, look, there's certain things that we see constitutionally that should be done that are not being done, and that's why you go to court to either overturn or shape, right?
Yeah.
Because then they tell us that their job is to interpret and say, okay, look, this is what the law says, this is what has been brought before us, let's see what we can do with it. The frustration that you feel after having gone through this October period, and from what you think that nothing was done, CT here would tell you no. That, by nature of the fact that you went and were heard,
yes,
and people saw and people understood that there has been a step that has been taken in a forward direction. And that what will cement that kind of action is continuous engagement at that kind of level. Because they say that you keep knocking at the door, either somebody's going to get so frustrated with the sound that they're going to open it, or they're actually going to want to see you. So one of those two things will result in the opening of the door.
Yes.
What are your thoughts in terms of, okay, well, you know what, we've been kicked in the teeth because, okay, we didn't get what we wanted. But does that mean that you stop?
No. First of all, thanks. And I do agree with CT over here. I think part of our constitution is working. And I think the reality is not all of it is working, because it's a document that has so many changes that effecting them all at once is virtually impossible. So I am grateful, and I know that there are people who suffered and lost their lives for us to be given this opportunity and the moment and time to speak, and that is why we went to courts. But at the same time, Article 27 guarantees equality. Right? So we're supposed to, when we're in courtrooms with lawyers, when we're in courtrooms with the Solicitor General, with the Attorney General, when the courtrooms with senators, it doesn't matter. We're supposed to be treated equally to them. And I think that's the next part of actualizing it. So yes, there is a lot of hope for Kenyans, and yes, it is a door for people to walk in and actually seek justice. I just do not think that the judiciary will be that positively responsive, because a lot of lawyers will also lose their jobs in the process.
Why? I need to stick on that point specifically, because you feel already that the judiciary will not do what it is constitutionally bound to do?
No, I feel like they interpret it, but how they interpret it sometimes is a little bit confusing, because like if you look at Article 163, it actually gave the grounds for when we can have a vacancy in the deputy's office. It's not imagined. It has been written there precisely. So him being impeached, by all means, he's not dead. And if he was dead, we would still get 60 days. So I feel like there are processes that have already been established. And for the judiciary to say, well, not yet, there's no precedence, the precedence is the Constitution. And if they read the letter to the T, I think the answer is already there. And I think that's where we find a place where, obviously, I don't blame the judiciary for what's going on, because if you look at what happened with Justice Mugabe, and when he summoned the Inspector General, his security was compromised. So I understand that the judiciary also have a lot to lose as individuals. They're humans also having a human experience. So I think we just have to be more gracious with each other. We have to review our Constitution and understand that there's a Hippocratic oath that they took without fear, favor, ill will, bias. It's impossible as a human being to do any of those things. AI can do it, but our reality is that we can't. And I think factoring in those things into accommodation, I think moving forward, we have to make significant changes in our country as a younger generation and as the older generation as well. I think we have to sit down and reanalyze our constitution and be like, actually, this is what we got right. This is what we haven't managed to implement. Let's have a conversation around that. Because I do feel like our judiciary need other protection other than state protection if they're going to effectively deliver independent rulings. Until then, I think it's just we're just grasping at straws.
Do you think that if there was more in terms of independent private petitioners, citizen petitioners, if there was more engagement, do you think that it would move the needle that you see that is so stuck right now?
Move the needle
from the judiciary point of view, because you're saying it looks like, I mean, you mentioned state capture in a previous document.
I think.
Do you think that if there were more people coming out, if there were more people petitioning, if there were more people going to court and saying, no, freedoms here guaranteed by the Constitution are not being met?
Yeah.
Because you it almost sounds as though you're saying that the judiciary is already stuck. Whether you talk until you're blue in the face, it's like it's a predetermined judgment. If more people came forward and kept anybody righteous,
do you think
it would make a difference?
I think it would, but I think we also have to look at the reality on the ground. There are 200 judges in Kenya, 20,000 lawyers. And I think we're about 58 million people, 58 million people. And everybody has to end up at the judiciary at some point in time. I think it is an impossible job for them to do. They are outmanned, they are under-resourced, and they're not in every single county. That's a reality. So I do think a lot of people going into the judiciary and actually seeking justice would make sense. But the institutions have not been stabilized yet intentionally. This is intentionally. Remember, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta said we'll revisit the judiciary, and he did. And some of us have paid the price for the last couple of years by not having enough judges to hear our cases. So the reality is, it is as much political as it has always been. And until we get ourselves, my dad called it a colonial hangover. Yeah, we have a colonial whiplash hangover where we still believe certain things function in a certain way, but the reality is our constitution has overtaken such things. So we find ourselves in a precarious situation because as much as we'd want 1 million people to go to court, can the judiciary handle that capacity? I don't think they can right now.
You know, the law, by its very nature, exists because there's this understanding that human beings are more inclined to doing wrong than doing right. Yeah. If the fundamental understanding was that we are likely to do right, the judiciary would not be that important. Now, when you're dealing with a political situation, I think beyond the law, you have to understand with great clarity how the political system in this country works and how our politicians work within that system. Because in order for them to get what it is that they want, they will often skirt on the borders of either abrogating that law completely, bending it, twisting it, moving around it, or looking for someone who they think will be complicit with the plans they have. So you as a lay person, you start at the wrong end of the stick. That's your starting point. Now, the issue that we're discussing at the reference point of the impeachment of the deputy president, it's the situation, not the impeachment. It's like the thinking around it. A watershed moment. It reminds me of the repealing of Section 2A. In the absence of that, the repealing of Section 2A, Kenya would not be where it is today because multipartism wouldn't have been there. With multipartism came all these things that we've seen. We've had one referendum, wonderful thing. We didn't know what a referendum was like, but we saw it. We have seen a situation where a presidential election is told, not happening, have it again. Now we've seen an impeachment. Now, every time something this momentous happens, we set something in motion. And those who set it in motion, what I'm certain about is that they haven't completely understood that there'll be consequences, most of which will not be in their favor.
I agree. I think you make a very fair and valid point, and you are right. It was 19th June 1982 when we moved from single party from multi-party democracy to a single-party dictatorship. And that was a young Mwai Kibaki and a Charles Jonjo. And that is what we saw. We saw our history repeating itself. We're just like, it's a very slippery slope, because soon after that happened the August coup of 1982. People's now repression. And we have seen that again happening. People have actually fought. We are the only country that has fired our employees and they have refused to go home. And I find that absolutely bizarre. We went to Parliament, we told them, hey, you guys, go home, where you have done a good job, but not good enough. And they said, no, we're going to stay. And then Ruto fires his cabinet. And then the fired employees who are MPs go back and hire the fired cabinet. And we're just like, okay, are we mad as a society?
Now that right there, you've actually encapsulated our political system in a way that is very difficult to do. I can't capture it in a better way.
Yeah.
Now, it tells you about the thinking. It tells you about the psychology. It tells you about the intentions. And it shows you a clear roadmap. This is what the political leadership is.
Yes.
And so if you're going to deal with the political leadership, remember, they more or less decide the directions we take, even with our law. Okay? Once you've understood them, then when seeking to have a contest with them, please don't start from the point of view that these people will be fair. They will not be fair.
Never.
Never, ever.
Never.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, once you've understood that, and right now, and especially when their backs are against the wall, because their backs were against the wall, they have now been alerted as to the possibilities. And then they proceed to impeach a deputy president. My goodness. In my mind, these people have cut off their own legs, not even realizing they've cut off their own legs.
Yeah.
Because if we can impeach a deputy president, what's an MP? We can recall you tomorrow.
What's the president? When Parliament has found out their job is to actually oversight the executive, then it's a beautiful day to be alive.
Precisely.
Yes.
You see, I look at the situations that we have, even the ones we consider to be bad, apart from the fact that it just affords us a little learning, but it also tells you how blind those who are in political power are, because they don't seem to fully understand or comprehend what they've set in motion.
Yeah.
And how detrimental it will be to them.
I agree. I sincerely hope for the spirit of Kenya that that's what happens, because I really feel like we're in a spiritual battle here.
When did we have ordinary citizens going to court? It started off with people like Omtata.
Yeah.
It's caught on. People go to court now.
Yes, they do.
People take their leaders on.
Yes.
People take their governors on.
Yes.
Now, these are not small things. Then you have an entire generation telling the political class, we are fed up.
Go home.
We are actually completely fed up. Forget our parents. They seem to tolerate you. You need to leave. Now, that generation are literally the future.
Yeah.
People who are my generation, there's one foot in the grave, there's one here. You can actually go at any time. So when you're alive, you need to be very grateful.
Yeah.
And yes, my generation are the ones who sleep and never wake up. Okay.
Okay.
Now, this other group of people are many. They are really very many.
Yeah.
They're not going away soon.
No.
So, don't you think somebody who is prudent or smart or wise would understand this and do something about what they're telling them? Because they are Kenyans like you, they're your employer also.
Yeah.
And they're telling you something and you're ignoring them. What do you think they're going to do to you?
I think this spirit of revolution is just beginning. And I really feel like the political class are completely unaware of what is happening, because I have a lot of friends who have studied abroad, gone to very expensive schools, have good jobs, run their parents' companies, and they were on the streets. We even wrote our phone numbers down on our bodies in case we got shot or injured, because we are just tired. We have lived in these countries where their systems work. We're going to spend a lot of money being educated there while Africa is being robbed by Africans for white people, which doesn't make sense to us. So the reality is we're 80%, as much as Ruto refers to us as human capital, which is basically slaves, that human capital is going to come back for him. And we are coming, because we are not stopping. We want our country back, and there's nothing going to stop us from getting it back. And my dad always told me, he tells me this thing, he said, why do you complain about other countries if you're not going to fight for your home? He says, all those other countries, their citizens fought for them to be like that.
And continue.
Yes. So you either fight or you keep quiet and you leave. But he told me, when you leave, you have to remember, you will not have another home Kenya is actually your only home. And so on that basis, I said, you know what, come and buy Mbaya. And as much as you're feeling death, for you, death is 1 foot away. For our generation, it is more so right now. Speaking out gets you disappeared, you in a gunia, you're missing, you're abducted. It doesn't make sense to us. And at the end of the day, we look at Ruto, we're just like, we're 80% of the population. We're more or less 40-something million. Are you planning on killing 40 million people so you can be by yourself in Kenya? Because it definitely won't work. Because as far as we understand the mathematics, we are the statistics that they need to borrow loans off. So it's imperative to keep the population alive and healthy. But in him, he's taking a completely different approach. And I think it's, again, that colonial whiplash, the hangover of let's do things like Moi did. And we're just like, you're not Moi. And we are also not Moi citizens.
Indeed.
Yeah.
There's also, and which has been called for a lot, that, you know, the revolution in the mind, obviously, when you say, no, this is not on, this cannot be anymore. But then there's also the call for what ought to be.
Yeah.
And it's very necessary that in as much as the angst, in as much as the, you know, just really the fed upness, if we can use that, let that be a word from today, all right? If that also is out in the open, then there must also be solution-oriented emotion that must be out there as well.
Yeah.
So what are we saying? Go get a voter's card. What are we saying? Make sure that you vote in 2027. Make sure that you are aware of what your constitution says. What are we saying needs to be done? Because all this emotion, pent up or otherwise, has to produce offspring, right? That is going to lead people forward.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with that emotion, which is well, it's well nurtured, and it is very well within, you know, anybody's right.
Yes.
What do we do with it?
First of
so
all,
that we don't waste it.
First of all, there's nothing in our constitution that says we have to wait until 2027. As far as I understand it, a vote is a 5-year employment contract. Kura ni kibarua ya miaka 5 kufanya kazi. And there's nothing that says that if our help are not working, we have to just endure and suffer. Because right now, we are actually all paying for our suffering. And I think that is ridiculous. Like, you wake up in the morning just like, who's going to torture me today? Here's my money. You know, so I think we have to change our mindset as to what is going on in our constitution and what we're entitled to. And that's why you see Ruto is very fearful of reconstituting IBC. Because he's afraid of a referendum. But in court right now, what has happened is that they have said that IBC did not need to be part of Kindiki's approvals. We're just like, great. So when we have our referendum, please, IBC, stay out of this one as well. Because the referendum is going to happen. And I think that was another safety mechanism in our constitution in case this same scenario happened again. I think Kibaki and the drafters of our constitution had the foresight of foreseeing the same thing happen again. And because they were part of the system and part of the game, they didn't want to tell us how it's played. But now I think we can all see what is happening.
Do you have friends who are constitutional lawyers? No, not who say they are, but who actually are.
Well, I had a lawyer who said he was a constitutional lawyer, and he did some things that were
unconstitutional.
I think blatant fraud. So,
why I asked the question is because the moment we get into the arena where we're now talking about what is constitutional and what isn't, that's where those who've taken the time and bother to study these things come in handy. Because we've had that discussion here. Do you need the commissioners for certain activities to take place, or is the executive just good enough? Once you have the CEO and the people who work within the secretariat, are they adequate? Okay. Or what is it that they can do without the commissioners, and what can they not do without the commissioners, and so forth? It's an interesting discussion.
It is, and I think as long as I think the Constitution is so fairly simply written for anybody to understand it. And if you just look at Article 1.1 that says all sovereign power belongs to the people and it can be exercised directly, I think we're the ones who have to decide what that means. So if Ruto doesn't want to hire commissioners, I think we're learned and educated enough to be like, you know what, fine, the CEO can do it. And the chief of staff or whoever it is there. And I think that's where we are in our country. We're just like, we're outwitting each other. And I really wish we'd be planning on colonizing our colonizers instead of fighting each other. But the reality is that we're just in this situation. And to also answer your second part of the question, I think it is time for Kenyans to actually get actively in politics. And I think what we're hoping to see in the next election is independent candidates. who are running for MPs, who are running for MCAs, who are running for senator, or running for governor. We don't want this thing to be whipped into a political party. We want people who are educated enough, who understand what they're doing in parliament, who are going there to make decisions on people and for their families, and understand that these are long-lasting choices that we're making, not simpletons. So we want to change the whole tone of how our politics is done, and I think that's what the new generation has shown us. And it was a beautiful time. I don't know if you guys have been to any protests, but there was such a magnetic electricity. It's like I was just born to be there. I don't know if that makes sense. It was...
Did you go to university in Kenya?
Partially.
Okay.
Yes.
Even if you had, some of the things that used to be the highlight of our times had long vanished. We had the JM Day, where we chose the times when we used to protest around the time when exams were around the corner.
Okay.
Yes. And don't ever underestimate the government. Don't ever. All they did was simply change the university timetable. So, yes, so when they came to me, we were all at home. So, don't underestimate.
Yeah.
The government has some of the sharpest people you can ever think of.
It really does.
Yes.
It really does.
Very well educated.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's just sad that they're not applying themselves for the betterment of our country. It's like for short-term political gain, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you have 100 acres, 200 acres, 1 acre, 5 acres. You're going to be buried in 6x6.
But
that's a reality.
To be fair to the government,
Yeah.
to be fair, especially this particular government, you see, we discuss the Ruto presidency as though it's the only presidency we've had since independence, and yet governments are a continuum. Moi inherited what Kenyatta had done. That's how I'm putting it simply. Kibaki inherited what Nania had done. What was his name again? Moi had done. Uhuru inherited what Kibaki had done. Ruto was in the government, yes, but he wasn't president. He also inherited what Uhuru had done. So some of the things that we see, why I use the word continuum, cannot be blamed on just one government.
I agree. I totally
However,
agree. Yes.
That having been said,
Yes.
the blame is interesting, but the solutions are a little more difficult, and perhaps that ought to be our focus. Because we have a love for complaining.
Yeah.
And it feels nice to complain and to moan. It's really good. But it's a lot of energy. Perhaps if that energy was spent...
People propose solutions all the time.
Yeah.
Propose an act.
Yeah. You propose solutions to those that have the mandate to act. Now, it's those that have the mandate to act will actually take it up and act. But if they don't, then you come back and you complain that I told you, let's do this, and you didn't do it. You want me to come and do it? Then get out of office, which is what they did on the 25th of June, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. We fired them, and they refused to go.
Okay. Hi, Wajiro, it's been an interesting conversation, and thank you very much for joining us today. So what next?
For us,
Yeah.
a referendum.
I see.
I think that's we're trying to experience to check off all the articles in our constitution and just
A referendum on what?
I think we need to look at our judiciary, our political system, and I think for one of the solutions you're talking about, I think it's very important to focus on education. They say the African saying is it takes a village to raise a child, and when you see like King Charles of England's first visit to Kenya is to talk about our education, I think there's a huge problem with that. And I think if we're teaching people our constitution, if we're teaching them about taxation, if we're teaching them about our political system, then you have a whole entire generation that is actually prepared to deal with what's happening.
Wajiro Mwangi, active citizen rights defender, has been our guest this morning. Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a lovely